So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon and welcome to our afternoon session. I have the pleasure to chair the meeting. I'm Günter Verheugen, Vice President of the European Commission and Commissioner in charge of Enterprise and Industry. I think I was chosen to chair it because from the beginning of my professional career was as a journalist, and it makes it easier for me. I would like to start by introducing the distinguished panelists here, and I start with my left side. We have Montek Ahluwalia. He is the Deputy Chairman of the Indian Planning Commission, which is the principal economic think tank of the Indian government and the body that sets the priorities for funding. We have Recep Tayyip Erdogan, Prime Minister of Turkey, who won the elections 3 years ago in a landslide victory, and since then transformed his country with impressive political and economic successes, and is now preparing the accession of his country to the European Union. To my right side, I have my colleague and friend Klaus Gutierrez, the Secretary of Commerce of the United States of America. Before he joined the American government, he was CEO of an international company that everybody knows. You know it from your breakfast table. And we have Klaus Kleinfeld, who is the President and Chief Executive Officer of Siemens. I do not know, is Siemens Germany's biggest private employer? Or second biggest?
Well, it's not the largest, but we are the one that has the biggest market cap.
Yeah, okay. He is just coming from his annual shareholders meeting yesterday in Munich, and as I have seen in Financial Times today, it was very successful because the price of your shares was rising sharply after the meeting. We will start our meeting with a short address by Prime Minister Erdogan, and then we will have a debate here in the panel, and after that I will open the discussion for the audience. Prime Minister Erdogan, may I invite you to deliver your speech? You can use the rostrum if you wish.
Değerli meslektaşlarım ve saygıdeğer konuklar,
honorable guests,
sözlerime bugün
I would like to start by saying that I'm very happy to be here with you today and to have this opportunity to address you. First of all, I would like to greet all the participants. I'm very happy to be with the participants of the panel, and I believe that through the messages and the discussions we will hold throughout this session, we will hopefully shed some light to developments in the world, and perhaps we will be able to convey important messages. Let me start with developments that have taken place in the Turkish economy. I will be very brief in explaining this. However, I do see merit in talking about these developments because there are many people in the audience here who have an important role to play in the economy of the world. I'm sure there are politicians, academics who are with us. And I would like to give you some brief information about the distance Turkey has covered in the last 3 years. We have managed to achieve a cumulative growth rate of more than 20% in the last 3 years. Inflation in Turkey was more than 30% 3 years ago in Turkey. Today, the annual inflation rate has gone down to 7.7% as of the end of the year 2005. Of course, as we do all this, we have targeted the Maastricht criteria for ourselves, and we continue to work in order to achieve the Maastricht criteria. We are not making any concessions from our economic program. We keep to a strict fiscal discipline, and this is the path that we continue to follow. Turkey today is the 17th largest economy in the world, And we have also, as you know, begun accession talks with the EU. So where we stand today is a new beginning for Turkey, if you will. Every year, my country aims to move towards new objectives by completing and fulfilling the previous objectives it has set for itself. I would also like to underline one more point here. Turkey, at the time we came to government, could not pay the interest on its debt through the taxes it collected, whereas today, through the collection of taxes, Turkey is able to not only pay for its debt, but is also able to meet its current expenditures and also plan for its investments. So the success, or the secret, let's say, behind the success lies in various realities. 3 years ago, Turkey was also a country where corruption was very rampant. In the financial sector, there were major deficits, which created a lot of burden for the Turkish economy. Whereas today, what is interesting to see is that the financial sector has become one of the most important sectors again and most profitable sector again. And both the public sector banks and the private banks in the last 3 years have started getting a lot of profit. In the past, these banks usually were in the red. They were losing money. And there were banks which went bankrupt, and those banks were transferred to a fund which was set up by the government. And that fund, as a result of all these bankruptcies, had a value of 50 billion US dollars, and that amount was in effect being paid by the 70 million Turkish people. Whereas those days now are gone. Today, the public sector banks are making profit. The private banks are also making profit. And we also see today that the private banks in Turkey are also starting their relations with global capital. And we also see the emergence of a center of attraction for the financial activities in Turkey. We have a lot of things going on. When we came to power, the index in the stock exchange was 9,000 points. Today, the index in the stock exchange is 46,000 points. So in 3 years, we have indeed achieved a lot of success in many areas. We have a rapid and balanced system of development, and we are moving towards becoming a middle-income level country from a lower-income family. And we are also moving through a rapid liberalization process in order to become an industrialized state. And we move towards the state of the industrialized developed countries. The market economy model is also very important, and we envisage an effective distribution and use of resources in the short term through this system. And we will continue to focus on main industrial sectors, because this theory in itself is not enough. And so it is important, therefore, that industrialization becomes a focus for the government, and through the support of and focus of the government, it is possible to move towards greater industrialization. Of course, our focus here is a market-based liberalization rather than a state-oriented approach. And we all know today that the Asian tigers have actually developed by using this model. And it seems that the Asian economies will, in the future, achieve serious economic power because of their labor capital and the amount of labor that they have, which will turn into capital. In order for developed economies to continue to show stable growth, there is a need to have a proper social security systems and public finance. These are two very important issues. In the longer term, it is also important to provide for a security of supply in energy, and it is also important to achieve technological infrastructure and continue to improve this infrastructure. The difference between a market and a state-oriented theory is that in the market economy concentrates on each developing country in the international economy through its comparative advantages, whereas the state-oriented economies look more into the comparative advantage of the international economy by developing its own efforts. Both approaches may have correct points, but we must also remember that a developing country today needs energy, transportation, educational infrastructure. And once those basic industries are established, it is more difficult for such a state to be governed by a state-oriented approach, because the state-oriented approach would obstruct development. And as a result, the resources of the country will not be efficiently utilized, and corruption will come about. Therefore, a state-oriented economy, after creating its own comparative advantages, must pave the way towards liberalization and must definitely move towards liberalization of customs tariffs, etc. So Turkey has accomplished this transformation. Turkey has an open trade policy. We are moving from a closed society, from a closed economy, to an open society, to an open economy. In 3 years, Turkey has achieved this transformation. And to achieve this, both myself, my colleagues in the government, ministers, the private sector, the non-governmental organizations have been working very hard, and we have opened up to the rest of the world. As a result of this comprehensive effort to integrate with the rest of the world, Turkey has also become a very important part of the world agenda. And the Turkish economy, through the support of our government, has also started developing. We have changed many of the laws in this period, and we have been working very hard to bring in global capital to Turkey. Today, we do not have any differentiation between domestic investors and foreign investors. In the past, it used to take months and months to, for example, establish a company in Turkey, whereas today, you can establish a company in 24 hours, and in 48 hours you can establish a company. So it's a lot easier today to establish companies. It's easier to bring in global capital to Turkey. So we have carried out the necessary legal framework in order to facilitate the entry of global capital to Turkey. Distinguished guests, as you know, today the current accounts deficit of the United States is compensated for by the current account surpluses of countries like China and others. And this has also been very important for the Eastern Asian countries. And there are important developments that are taking place in the Asian countries as well. In fact, if you look at the current accounts deficit in 2005, we will see that this is also an important topic for Turkey as well, because the growth of the current accounts deficit is a problem that has to do with the imbalance in the import and the exports. And if we look at the composition of our imports, we see that intermediary goods and investment goods have a role to play here. We follow the increase in our current accounts deficit very closely, but we are also taking into consideration its impact on the exports, Turkish exports. Turkey has achieved a lot of growth in imports and exports in the last 3 years. It is the share of capital-intensive sectors in our exports is an important indication of the kind of change that Turkey is going through. In the first 11 months of 2005, we had $65 billion of exports, and this has reached now to $72.4 billion. We expect this number to grow further. We're also working on diversification of export markets, and in this respect, we have started with an initiative which has to do with neighboring and surrounding countries. This is a trade development strategy which aims at a market of over $300 billion of import demand. Let me also underline another important point here. The United States We have also prepared projects for market access to the US, to Canada, and we also have preparations for projects towards Brazil, Mexico, Argentina, Chile, and Venezuela. And we're also in line with our regional strategies, looking at programs in working with India, Japan, South Korea, Indonesia, and Malaysia. And we aim to continue to develop our dialogue with those countries. We also continue to work on major energy and infrastructure projects. And this is also a part of our privatization programs, which runs in parallel with political and economic restructuring in the world. All of these activities make Turkey a more attractive place for foreign investors. Between 2005 and 2007, we aim and expect that approximately $5 billion annually of investment will come to Turkey. The per capita income is $5,000 in Turkey at the moment. When we came to power, it was $2,500. And the national revenue, the GDP, was $180 billion in Turkey in total, and today this figure has gone to more than $350 billion. We have established 20 free zones, and the trade volume in those free zones reached $22.1 billion. And one of the most important elements of our trade is transportation and the transportation capacity that Turkey has. Another important advantage of Turkey is the fact that Turkey can play a key role in the development of global energy supply and its security. Our country is in a region where 3/4 of the world's oil and natural gas reserves exist. At the moment, we are benefiting from our geographic and geostrategic position, and we are trying to create a corridor between energy-rich countries and the consuming countries. On the one hand, we have the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline, and we are also working on a pipeline towards eastern parts of Turkey through Kazakhstan. There is also a pipeline in the south from Kirkuk to Ceyhan. We also have a Samsun-Ceyhan oil pipeline, which is for crude oil. We have a natural gas pipeline that is going from Samsun into the country. We have the Russian natural gas, and we will also have other natural gas pipelines coming to Turkey from the south. So Turkey becomes an intersection point for all these energy resources to flow into Europe. We have also a pipeline project with Greece, and that has already broken ground. And we are moving forward with all of these plans, making Turkey, as a result, a terminal for the distribution of energy. In this way, it will be possible through Turkey to provide these resources. In Ceyhan, we will be able to transport oil of different resources and quality from one terminal to many markets. And such flexible supply is important for the world oil markets. Distinguished guests, I also would like to touch upon our relations with the EU. Full membership to the EU has been the main political target for Turkey, and at the moment we are going through the screening process with the EU, and throughout this process 8 of the 35 chapters have already been screened, and other chapters are also in the process of being screened at the moment. Under the Austrian presidency, we will work with the Austrian presidency and also with Commissioner Mr. Rehn, and they have also stated in their statements that it will probably be possible to start with the negotiation of some chapters. Turkey is doing its homework. We are doing what we should be doing. On the 3rd of October last year, the accession talks, were started formally, and we have shared that excitement with the media, with the NGOs, with the bureaucrats, and with the rest of the society. And our aim is to work through this process as swiftly as we can. no doubt there is another important development, which is that under the auspices of the UN Secretary General, Turkish Prime Minister and the Spanish Prime Minister have initiated and co-sponsored a project on the alliance of civilizations. And this project is very important, and it also addresses what Turkey can contribute to Europe within the EU context. And this is another indication of how important it is to make the EU the right place to address the alliance of civilizations. And I think that this initiative will indeed be very important. Prior to full membership, Turkey is the only country that has achieved a customs union with the EU, because, as you know, Turkey achieved a customs union with the EU in 1996 without being a member of the EU. And that puts Turkey in a very different position vis-à-vis other candidates for membership to the EU. The EU is also our main trading partner. We have carried out important structural reforms in our economy, as I explained before, and those reforms will also be very important in our relations with the EU, and we expect to receive more foreign capital as a result of these developments. Turkey is also the gateway to the East, and it's the gateway for the East towards Europe. And this is also very important because Turkey sits on communication networks, it sits on transportation networks, and therefore Turkey is indeed very important. As Turkey, we aim to be a leader in regional trade, and we will succeed in that. We are determined to do that. Within the EU, Turkey can be active in automotive, food, tourism, electronic appliances, machinery, spare parts, and textiles, because Turkey has a comparative advantage in those sectors and could therefore play a highly competitive role, especially in these sectors. And we hope that we will succeed in these endeavors in the shortest time possible. So I can say, in conclusion, that Turkey has managed to achieve important advantages in the economic arena in a short period of time. This has to do with stability and confidence that has been built during the tenure of our government. 65% of the Turkish parliament belongs to our political party, and that is quite a majority. And this stability that we've been looking for many years has actually come about as a result of this majority and the determination we have. And this has made Turkey an attractive place to come. We know that the investor, the entrepreneur, who will come to a country looks for stability and confidence in the markets. And Turkey is at this point where it can offer these to the investors. It is also, in addition to that, a land of opportunity for the investors. I would like to end my words with my greetings to you as the Prime Minister of a country which I term as the land of opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister, for your very impressive stock-taking. I think that the example of Turkey clearly shows how much framework conditions, if set in the right way, can improve the economy of a country in a relatively short period of time. Now let's move to, sorry, it's yours. Sorry. I have hijacked this earphone. Let's move to the main topic of our discussion this afternoon. Our starting point is the fact that economic globalization has achieved a new dimension and will continue with growing speed. And the political question is, how do we manage globalization in a way that it will finally produce a win-win situation for both sides, the developed countries and the developing countries? And how do we tackle the different expectations? How do we discuss it with our citizens, which have completely different perceptions? I think, Carlos, that American citizens certainly want to defend the American way of life and America's role as an economic and political superpower. I think that Europeans want to maintain the European social model, whatever it is. In my understanding, it is high quality of life, high income, high social security, high environmental standards. I think that the leaders of developing countries want to guarantee that their citizens have a decent living, and I think that the economy wants to see clear, predictable, and stable framework conditions everywhere so that it can grow, invest, make money, and finally create jobs. So I would like to ask the panelists, what do you expect from the other side, developing countries from developed countries and developed countries from developing countries, and what do you offer in order to manage the change that we are facing? May I ask the question first to our guest from India, Mr. Ahluwalia, please.
Thank you. Well, I think as you put it, developing countries have been participating in the globalization of the world economy for the last 20 years. And I think in the early stages, there used to be some concern that the restructuring that it would require in developing countries would be very painful. One of the major successes over these years has been a very widespread acceptance of the logic of globalization and integration. And I think what the developing countries now expect is that markets remain open in developed countries, especially as new forms of comparative advantage surface, which enable developing countries to enter into areas which traditionally they were not in fact involved in. Now, this is not just a matter of producing one product or producing another product, but it's a recognition that technology changes around the world have made it possible to partition production so that a great deal of sharing in different types of production streams can take place. And developing countries are actually well placed to compete in many of these, especially those countries that manage to bring about an improvement in human skills and technical skills. Now, I think that opportunity is very much there. Certainly, we in India see the possibilities of win-win outcomes. And what we are hoping is that the openness that is necessary for this mutually beneficial exchange to take place will not only remain there, but we recognize that there are sensitivities, and in a sense, the leadership in developed countries has to make the case at home that these are win-win, mutually beneficial exchanges for both developed and developing countries. That's the most important thing.
Okay, thank you very much. Secretary Gutierrez, what is the American view?
Well, I think that what we're all looking for, the great thing is we have common objectives in the sense that we all want prosperity and we all want our people to grow and we all want the lives of our citizens to improve. What we have found in a developed market such as the US and other markets that has been very helpful from the standpoint of creating an environment for prosperity is the fundamental belief in freedom and transparency of the rule of law. We know that when laws are clear, that when they're transparent, when they're predictable, that innovators have more field to innovate and more freedom and more of a desire. So it enables businesses and enables innovation. We've also found that it's important to define the role of government and the role of the private sector. And this is different in countries, this is different throughout the world. So I'm speaking about a point of view that we believe has led to our success. And that is that the role of the government is to create an environment. We don't believe that governments are in the business of doing business. We don't believe that governments create value, but they create an environment so that innovation can flourish and creativity can flourish. And it's the recognition that you need that environment so that a strong private sector can provide jobs and can provide growth. I was very impressed with the Prime Minister's statements regarding the amount of time that it takes a business to open in Turkey. I'm sometimes amazed that in some countries it takes months to open a business when, again, the role of government is to create an environment so that businesses can open rapidly because it is for the benefit of the country to have a focus on a playing field that incentivizes businesses. The last thing I would say is one of the things that we have seen that creates a difference among societies that can actually differentiate a growing and prosperous society versus one that is not, is the ability to allocate capital efficiently. And while that may sound like a very economic technical term, we see it in very simple terms. And that is that business people and consumers allocate capital more efficiently than a federal government. And therefore, tax policy should enable more money to go into the hands of consumers and businesses so that they can decide where they allocate that money, as opposed to assuming that if you allocate all the money federally or centrally, that you will get a better outcome. Those are things that we believe will be important comparative advantages for the future.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kleinfeld, CEO of a global company, you know both sides. How do you see the comparative advantages? How do you see the shortcomings? And what would be your expectation?
Well, I think for international companies like ours, I mean, we are present in more than 190 countries. We have a total of 465,000 employees, and we drastically expand in all the regions. Just yesterday, when we announced the Q1 numbers, we saw a growth of more than 70% in Asia. So the world has changed, and it's continuing to change. In the last 30 years, I think, for business, it has generated a lot of additional options, and that came through a number of wonderful inventions. Cost of transportations have gone down, a lot of innovation in that. Communication has really opened up the world, and free trade has gained, and a lot of additional countries have come into the game, which we call the world economy. And that is very positive for international companies. When we ask ourselves where to locate a new facility, we obviously always have the choice to look at different countries, but there's a number of factors that go into that decision. And fundamentally, if you look at it, I would say they come from the old cluster model. I mean, ideally, you don't only want to have excellent people there. If you can combine it, excellent people with a good supplier industry, for instance, good universities, ideally outstanding customers that are demanding, that want to drive forward, and a growing market. That's, I mean, the situation where we would be ideally wanting to continue to invest. But if you look at what many countries have done, and we've just heard here in a very impressive way what Turkey has been going through, the positive development, and I'm very sure what I see from our company there, this will continue to be a very positive development. At the end of the day, when you ask yourself, what does it boil down to if clusters are there, there's fundamentally another competitive advantage, probably the only lasting competitive advantage, and that's the quality of the people. And I believe that in terms of industrial policy, as well as in terms of educational policies, government can do a lot to attract business.
Thank you very much. Prime Minister Erdogan, traditionally, Turkey was a country where the state plays the most decisive role in the economy, and you told us that the new approach in Turkey is market-oriented and not state-oriented. But I would like to know, what are the most important difficulties you are facing when transforming an economy like you are doing?
First and foremost, allow me to mention one fact. Of course, there are habits, the ways that people do things, and sometimes it's very difficult to change them, and the consequences of that is very high. And we have had that kind of a problem too. We had a more statist approach in the country. It had turned into a habit, if you will, and it was quite difficult to overcome that habit. And it was a question of having the necessary determination to overcome that. And it was the people in Turkey who gave us that determination, because 3 years ago, when the elections took place, the people gave us this 65% majority in the parliament. And if that hadn't been the case, it would not have been so easy, perhaps, to move ahead with this transformation. So we were able, actually, to achieve this transformation through this power which was given to us by the people. And if we believe in the market economy, if we believe in the liberalization of markets, we believed also that we should do all that is necessary to achieve that. Because at that time, almost all of the state-owned enterprises and institutions were showing a loss. And this was money that was coming out of the people's pockets. And those institutions were not able to follow up with technological change development in the world. And these institutions, state-owned state-owned companies, became places where sometimes politicians employed their friends and others that they know, and there was really no efficiency to them, and they were at a point where they were to be closed down. That's why we initiated the privatization effort when we came to power. The moment we started with privatization efforts, we saw this statist approach again resisting, and there were all sorts of difficulties, but we still moved ahead. And there were even cases where there were demonstrations, some went to occupy some facilities, factories, etc. But we were very determined, and we succeeded. We continue with privatization with the same pace. Of course, the former Iron Curtain companies have had very successful examples. They have managed to move ahead very swiftly. Turkey has come to a point now where she has managed to achieve a lot of privatization. I believe that if we continue in this path, we will, for example, be able to get state-of-the-art technology into the country very quickly. And this is, in fact, happening in the last 2 years. Another point is we will move from a labor-intensive system into a more technology-driven industrial system. And as we move in this transformation, we are also providing some incentives to some of the less developed regions. And we see that as a result of this policy, there's investments in these less developed areas. And we have come to a point where we are now able to work with more qualified labor. This will be an important advantage for Turkey, especially against the backdrop of Turkey's accession talks with the EU, because today, as we all know, qualified labor force is what is important, not the unskilled labor force. So this is the way Turkey is headed, and we're also headed towards high-quality production. This is another important point for us. We have 4 main objectives. First, we want to attract investment. Second, we want to achieve qualified labor force. Third, we want to have efficient production. And fourth, we want to, of course, gain as a result of these activities. And this is how we move forward.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ahluwalia, as a deputy chairman of a planning commission, I'm very happy to learn that at least in other parts of the world there's also a commission working. But the planning commission sounds a little bit old-fashioned, no? And would you agree that in modern society the role of policymakers is just to create the right framework conditions, and that the business people have to do the rest? Is that the Indian model as well?
I think that's a fairly universal perception that governments have to do very different things from what they were doing earlier. I agree with you that the term planning commission may sound old-fashioned, but we're not doing the kinds of things that used to be done in what you associate with the term planning. I mean, I think the basic idea that the role of government is to create an environment where you can have a healthy, competitive private sector develop is something we totally share. And I think that's something that probably all developing countries now subscribe to. Of course, as Prime Minister Erdogan said, that in many developing countries, there is a gradual process of moving from a somewhat heavy public sector presence. That's happening also everywhere. It's not eliminated. I think in India, for example, we have gone through a process of bringing in private equity and private ownership into public sector corporations, but we're not actually, on principle, privatizing all public sector corporations. But the important thing is that the role of the private sector is hugely increased. So whether you do that by allowing more private enterprise to expand, or do it necessarily by converting existing public sector enterprises into private sector enterprises? I mean, that choice different countries make in different ways.
Mr. Kleinfeld, would you confirm that India is an easy place for investment?
Well, what can I say? I mean, in the 73% growth in Asia in our first quarter, the growth in India was 232%. So I would not be credible if I were to say it would be a difficult place. However, I have to say, although we are in India for many years, I have to say that the liberalization and privatization that India has been pushing for has really gained significant momentum in the last years. And I would give very strong praise also to the Planning Commission and the government. I think that was very wise. At the same time, I believe that, I mean, when you have a country like India, 1.1, 1.2 billion people, and let's make probably not too difficult assumption that in a way intelligence is distributed equally around the planet. So at the end of the day, it's a numbers game, and then education comes into the game. And I think that's exactly what the government of India as well as the government of China have fully understood. I mean, the US has always built on that, including a very smart, in my view, very smart immigration policy. Then it comes, in my view, to the most essential point, and that's all about what quality of people do you have, and how do you get the best, brightest, well-educated people into certain places. If this is then combined with liberalization, with a positive economic climate, and ideally with an industry sector-oriented policy, a cluster-oriented policy, so a selective one, I think that's a pretty attractive combination if we find that.
Carlos, the message you and I got from our colleagues from India and Turkey is very clear. Strong competitors are coming, and not only on grounds of low tech and low wages, but as we have heard, the ambitions are much higher. And in both cases, we can already see that the societies are successful. How do we, the American and the Europeans, but would like to ask you as the American representative, how do we address the challenge here? How can the American government, for instance, improve the innovation capacity, the innovative capacity of the American society and economy?
I think the basic point of new competitors are arriving on the scene, and very aggressive and ambitious competition is right on. We often talk about that with worldwide expansion and worldwide markets opening up, that we've gained 3 billion new consumers, but we've also gained 3 billion new competitors. And we believe that the way to deal with that is to open our markets and compete. And that competition is a tremendous spark for innovation. When companies have to compete, they get better, they become more productive, they innovate faster. We have not seen, and I have not seen, a country that has increased its level of innovation by becoming more protectionist. So that openness to new ideas, openness to new competition is a tremendous spark to innovation. And if you combine that with liberalization and a marketplace that is conducive to private enterprise. It's interesting, in the United States, while we are often perceived to be home of very large corporations, 70% of our job growth has come from small and medium-sized companies. So our growth and our vitality and our energy is from new entrepreneurs, new companies with new ideas. And those new ideas very often are breakthrough ideas. I often remind myself that not long ago, Microsoft was a small company, and Google was a small company. And they were started in an environment that fostered people to come forward and say, I have an idea, I'm going to take a risk, and I want to compete.
Again, Mr. Kleinfeld, you as the one who has the global experience here, which conditions does a global company need in order to improve competitiveness via innovation? Which conditions do you need in the different parts of the world? Are they different?
Yes, oh, absolutely. They are significantly different. And obviously, it depends very much on which industry you are looking for. And that's, in a way, a good message, because it means that there are some countries or some regions on this planet that have focused on attracting certain industries, which is a good thing. I mean, I truly believe that there is an added advantage when you are following the cluster approach. Obviously, what helps significantly any company is not just strong competition, it's also customers. Customers that are willing to go into the forefront, that are pushing the companies, that are willing to take a certain risk on the innovation front, and that are willing to invest. You know, at the end of the day, if I find customers at one place, what happens if I'm not represented there, which is very rare for our company, but over time, I mean, I'll move more people there. I mean, the typical thing is we sell something there. Next thing that happens is we have an application center there. Next thing that happens is we have a manufacturing site there. Next thing that happens there is we have part of our headquarter function there for that particular business. That's kind of a natural process, and we see that happening every day. Therefore, I think on the government side, the only conclusion for the government is let's focus on liberalizing as many industries as we can. Let's make sure that we have a smart, that means focused industry policy, and let's make sure that we attract and educate the best and brightest. Because that's, I mean, a mix that no companies can resist.
Coming back to India and Turkey, you have presented this very ambitious objectives, and it is obvious that you need to concentrate on education, training. You must improve the skills. Even research and development, probably more important. Can you tell us, Mr. Ahluwalia, how you are dealing in India with the problem of education and professional training?
Well, that's actually one of the most important things in our view, that the government should create an environment which can promote that. I mean, we have had a fairly successful approach as far as higher education is concerned compared to many other developing countries. Our higher education system is dominantly publicly funded, and our expectation is, as we move ahead in future, we've got to move to a situation where it should be possible to have private activity even in this area, but public funding of education will have to continue. And we will be focusing not just on higher education in universities, but also on a much broader range of training and skill development. In this area, our thinking, based on the experience we have, we've had some very good results where we've brought in private industry into existing industrial training institutes. I mean, traditionally, our industrial training institutes were set up by the government. In the last several years, in many different states, there have been experiments to bring in the local private sector, to bring in new types of skills, new types of training, and those experiments are very successful. The experience we have is that as economic policy liberalization has led to an expansion and growth, we can see that we will run into skill limitations. And the successes we've had in many areas have been critically dependent on the quality of human capital. So from a long-term point of view, that is something that we really do intend to work on, both through the public sector and through the private sector.
Mm-hmm. And Prime Minister Erdogan, which role does the question of education and skills play in your policy of improving the economy of your country?
Çok teşekkür ediyorum.
Thank you very much for the question.
Benim yaramı deştiniz.
You have, in fact, opened a very fresh wound for me, because in Turkey we are just now on the brink of a big leap in education. And we have been trying very hard to put education in the forefront, and for the first time in a long time, and in fact, the biggest share of the budget in Turkey has now been allocated to education. We do not still find this amount sufficient. We believe that the share of education in the budget must continue to grow. From the point of view of professional or vocational training, the number of senior high schools which provide vocational education is only 30% of the whole. And compared to developed countries, this is very low, because this figure is about 70% in some countries, or 65% in others. So we want to increase this number of vocational or professional training institutions from 30% of the overall number of institutions to 50–60%. There are, of course, some difficulties which we have to surmount to achieve that, and we will be working on this. We realize that it's very important to educate qualified, skilled labor, and these high schools that provide vocational training and the training in universities will facilitate the work in the future for the industrialists as well. And the industrialists will not have to themselves make special investments into training, and they will instead benefit from the graduates of the vocational training schools that we have, or we will have. We are taking some steps in this regard. We are working on a project about this, and I hope that throughout our tenure in this government, we will succeed in this, and we will increase the number of schools providing vocational training. With regard to research and development also, I'd like to say that for the first time again during the tenure of our government, we have set aside a very important share, and we gave money to the Turkish Scientific Research Center, and this goes in way of supporting research and development, and those incentives will continue to be provided to academics, to students, for research-oriented projects. And I can say that we have begun a new era with regard to research and development and vocational training, and we are very hopeful for the future.
Carlos? Yeah, I wanted to add, because I thought that was a very important point. The education point, of course, is, if there's one thing we have all learned, is that education will make the biggest difference long term. The quality of education, the quality of people. We know that the best jobs are in higher grade education levels, that the greatest growth is in countries that are increasing their education levels. So very few things are as important as education over the long term. On the point of R&D, this is an interesting aspect as well, because there is a role for government here. The R&D that we do in the United States, research and development, is done 2/3 in the private sector and about 1/3 in the public sector. The difference is that the public sector does basic research, projects that sometimes take 10 years to complete, 15 years to complete, experimentation. Things where the private sector may not have the time, the patience, the competitive conditions, or the return on their investment. So the private sector focuses very much on development of new products, and the public sector can add value by investing in basic research. The important thing, as the Prime Minister mentioned, and our colleague from India, is to find ways to recognize that research will only benefit the country or society if it can be turned into a product that improves people's lives. And that's where the private sector comes in to that linkage.
Yeah, that is what we call innovation, right? The transfer from knowledge into product and processes. Research and development, Mr. Kleinfeld, high on the European agenda in those days. You know that the day before yesterday, the European Commission presented the first analysis of the 25 national reform plans to tackle the so-called Lisbon objectives. And President Barroso and we have told the European public that we will not meet the 3% target by 2010 if some member states do not considerably increase the spending. How important is, in your view, the role of governments in research and development?
Well, I mean, let me start with a corporate perspective. We are spending 5.2 billion, or we spent 5.2 billion last year. That's about 7% of our sales.
It's more than the European Union spends. It was a community budget. From the community budget.
What's the total number for the European Union then? Well, anyhow, I mean, we have 47,000 people in our workforce that do nothing else but R&D day in, day out. So R&D is very high up on our agenda, but that's also because we are a company that's been built around innovation. Therefore, obviously, I mean, it's not about government funding of R&D. I think that's not the role a government should play here. In fact, I would argue that probably it's counterproductive, but there are some areas when you newly want to start something off where government can play a kind of a power booster role and direct various industries in a oriented way towards achieving certain goals that otherwise would not be achievable. That role is a very positive one, and in my view, the European Union is doing a good job in that and has actually done a pretty outstanding job. If you look at some of the industries that have been created, just thinking about, for instance, the mobile communication sector, which has started in Europe, and that's why GSM today is a world standard, and let's not forget that was a European standard and was originally created like this. And I don't even want to talk about the aerospace industry, which is another, in my view, very positive example where the European Union has played a very good role. There's one issue, Commissioner, that I don't have a good answer for, and where I'm sure we need the support, business needs the support from politics. I've talked about customers that are at the forefront, that want to innovate. But obviously, I mean, customers is not the end of the process. At the end, we need consumers. And obviously, you get more companies at places where consumers are open for new things. Not only open, where they are enthusiastic, ideally, about innovations, about change. Now, we all know, and this was also referred to here in regards to Turkey, we all know that the change of attitudes in nations is a very difficult one. And the more wealthy we get, probably the more this demand of let's not change too much is getting stronger. So the big question is, particularly for the developed countries, how can we change the attitude towards being more open to new things? Because in a way that also would foster more companies to be able to invest in that regions.
Is somebody here to answer that question? Klaus?
Well, I think it goes back to the fundamental philosophy of a society. If you expect the change to be mandated from a federal government or from a centralized body, then change will come very slow. If you put confidence and trust in millions of citizens, they will drive change. The role of the private sector is to grow, and you cannot grow without changing. So when you have a society that relies on private sector entrepreneurship and innovation, they will find change because they have to find change in order to grow, in order to survive.
I think this is a good point, Carlos. Entrepreneurship as a basic instrument for growth in a modern society. There's a difference between the Americans and the Europeans. In the United States, you have a much stronger, let me say, spirit, entrepreneurial spirit than traditional European countries have. But now I would like to know how it is in Turkey and in India with entrepreneurship and the role of the small and medium-sized enterprises, which we have identified in Europe, and nothing against Siemens, Mr. Klaus, you play your role, but you will agree that the SME sector is an underperforming sector. The potential is not fully exploited. What is the role of the small and medium-sized enterprises in Turkey? And how do you strengthen that?
Aslında ben tabii kendisiyle daha önce de bir ortak toplantıda birlikte olduğumuz Siemens'in değerli CEO'su.
We were in another meeting with the CEO of Siemens, I believe, and I'll tell him something. I believe that political support is important in achieving change. Now, changing of the society, there too, the politicians have a role to play. And it is important to have some sort of determination. And it is also important to share certain values with society. And it is then important to achieve those targets. Of course, for all this to happen, the first thing is you have to be able to change yourself. If you as the politician can change yourself and can catch up with what's changing in the world, if you as a person are able to change yourself, then quite naturally this is an indication that change is occurring in that society itself. Of course, what's needed in addition to that is definitely the private sector. And here, the private sector, the media, all of them must be present in this process of change. Today, the private sector is very important, so important that it is more important than politics in some places, in some matters. So this shows that politics and the economy has to work together to create this change. And there's no other way. And such change ought to occur in the world. This is the only way we can move towards a brighter future, towards peace. Now, just a while ago, I wanted to touch upon one point, and that had to do with competition. In 2005, and I have noticed this, defense expenditure or expenditure for armaments is quite high in the world. If you look at this figure, it's around $1 trillion, which is the amount that is set aside for this sector. Now, if you look at the countries who are poor, who are trying to provide better education to their children, we see that they do not have any support in that sense, comparable in a way to what the other sectors get. So this brings about some sort of unfair competition. And it is impossible for less developed or underdeveloped countries to overcome their situation given the current circumstances. If they do, it's really remarkable. It happens only with some countries, but it doesn't happen with all. They cannot overcome their problems. And that's why, in fact, we see that in most parts of the world, there's still a big fight against poverty. And we see that from a distance, and we talk about what we can do for them. But when we look at what is being done, you can't really say that it's a lot. We have to accept this fact. And we must therefore review our choices. I think it's necessary to look at our choices once again, especially if we want to achieve a highly competitive market. There's another point. In Turkey, we believe that it is important to support startups and smaller enterprises. And what we do now is to provide some incentives in various parts of the country. We have provided some incentives in 49 provinces in Turkey. For example, we provide land without any money to be paid. We provide reductions in energy costs. We also provide some tax exemptions, and we provide some reductions in social security payments. This is what we're trying to do in order to encourage the entrepreneurial spirit of our people. our people have entrepreneurial spirit, but we must continue to support it. And these are the kinds of things we do to support that entrepreneurial spirit. When we came to power, the small-scale entrepreneurs were supported, but the interest rate on the support was 47%. Whereas today, the interest rate on the support we provide to the entrepreneurs has gone down to 15–16%. So our goal there was to actually support that entrepreneurial spirit. Otherwise, that entrepreneur with the entrepreneurial spirit would die because he or she would not have a way to move forward. Whereas today, with the current atmosphere, it's easier for them to engage in entrepreneurial activity. They produce spare parts, perhaps for Siemens in Turkey. And so this all goes for the entrepreneurial spirit and what the government does to support that spirit. We continue to work on this. We will continue to focus on this. We think it will be successful given the success we've achieved so far. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Time is running out now, and it's always difficult to draw conclusions after such a debate, but there was something that really strikes me, and I think that is an important message. We have representatives here from different parts of the world, different regions, with different experiences, but it was obvious that here's a very strong consensus how the division of labor between the governments and the business world should be organized. There was a clear consensus that the private sector has to be the driving force for development, and that only the private sector can do it, and that the role of policymakers is to create the best possible framework conditions. And if that is the common view, I would leave Davos a little bit more optimistic than I was before I came. Thank you very much to everybody who was here on the podium, and thank you very much for listening.